Obviously, you're not going to go and talk about temples where God is worshipped with the device of men's hands and how absurd that is. You don't have a whole lot of that kind of idolatry around. And so you're going to do an internal critique of the unbeliever's worldview, talking about things which are more contemporary. And I'm going to give you at least 4 handles on apologetics this morning that you can use to begin or pursue a conversation showing the internal problems in the unbeliever's worldview. And I am confident that they are not so time-dated that they only work in the 1960s or the 1970s. These are enduring problems in the history of philosophy. And they will certainly continue to be problems that the unbelieving world is not able to answer throughout the history of mankind. I think the form of the problem and the way in which it's discussed may change, but you will be able to use these 4 problems, I think, very effectively when you're talking with people, trying to show why the unbelieving worldview doesn't make sense out of human experience. So let me talk about these 4 things. First of all, the question of moral absolutes. We have used this illustration a number of times at this conference already. The issue of moral absolutes in the area of ethics. Everybody you encounter is going to have a moral point of view. Even those who say they don't believe in morality will tell you eventually that you should believe that there is no morality rather than believing otherwise, which is to say they have a morality about no morality. That is, am I going too fast? You got that? They say people shouldn't believe that there is a moral point of view, but that shouldn't believe it is itself a moral point of view, a very perverse one, but nevertheless it is saying something about how you should live your life. No one can avoid giving a moral point of view. Everyone lives in this world and believes certain things are right and wrong, even if the only thing they think is wrong is in believing that anything is wrong. Now, how does the unbelieving world make sense of moral absolutes? Can the unbelieving world make sense of moral absolutes? Our answer is no, it cannot. We're asking which worldview makes human experience intelligible. And now that aspect of human experience we're talking about is judgments of right and wrong, and acting as though that there is good and evil in this world. Which worldview can make sense of that? Let's stop and ask ourselves, what are the options if you're a non-Christian? From the Christian standpoint, there is right and wrong because there is a God who is eternal and personal and who reveals himself and shows us what is unchanging good and what is evil by contrast. But in the non-Christian worldview, you cannot take good to be whatever God has revealed about his own holy character because you don't believe in this God. So then what is the definition, what is the standard of good if you're a non-Christian? And there are 2 basic outlooks on this. I'm going to try to simplify all of secular ethics for you this morning. It'll be oversimple, but I trust helpful. The unbelieving world will say that good is what evokes approval, or on the other hand, good is what achieves certain chosen ends. On the one hand, good is what evokes approval, and then there are schools of thought that say good is what achieves certain ends. Let's begin with the first of those options. Good is whatever evokes approval. There are 2 forms of this outlook on ethics. The one says that good is whatever evokes social approval. The other says good is what evokes your individual personal approval. That is to say, the evoking of approval is either society at large or the individual himself, herself. The difficulty with this point of view, obviously, is that it makes a sentence, well, let's take the view that good is what evokes social approval. If that is the case, and we are consistent with that approach, you're going to answer the fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own conceits. Let's take this philosophy and see where it leads us. If that is the case, then a sentence such as, the entire society willingly went along with the evil, of oppressing the Jews. Now that sentence seems to make perfectly good sense. But if good is defined by what evokes approval, then it would be by definition impossible to criticize a society for what it does. But even unbelievers criticize societies for what they do. They believe that societies are humane or inhumane. They believe that societies are too warlike. They believe sometimes that societies are too uptight about sexual ethics. They make evaluations of societies as a whole, and those evaluations would be meaningless if good is whatever evokes approval by the society at large. Moreover, we ordinarily think of things evoking approval or disapproval, if you want to look at the negative side of ethics. We ordinarily think of things evoking approval because they are good. We don't think of the evoking approval as constituting their goodness. You understand the difference? If you ask, well, why did that evoke society's approval? Or why did that evoke society's disapproval? We tend to think that good and evil are attributes of the things, events, activities, attitudes in themselves, and not simply another way of speaking of evoking approval. The unbelieving world cannot even understand the logic and the language of ethical discourse. You're going to take what anyone is going to be talking about in human experience, their moral judgments, and show that their own theory of ethics is meaningless. The very things they say are meaningless given their philosophy of ethics. The idea that good is what evokes social approval is found also in the view that good and evil are just intuited by people. We can't argue about it. It's just something that you intuit. You have this feeling about it. And if that, of course, is what the unbeliever means by good, then there is no rational discussion of ethics left and no way to resolve differences of opinion. In fact, there's no way to even say that a person's intuition about what is good is itself good, because then you would have to intuit that your intuition is right, which is to say you would have to intuit that your intuition about your intuition is right, which is another way of saying you'd have to intuit that your intuition about your intuition about your intuition is right. And do you see where I'm going? Intuitionism leads to an infinite regress. There is no explanation here of good and evil, and there's no rational way of resolving disagreements between different societies. We would have absolutely no right to criticize another culture for, say, expecting that the widow of a man will throw herself on his funeral pyre and burn to death, and force her to do so if she refuses to do it willingly. There are societies that have practiced that. Not many unbelievers want to say, hey, well, it's different strokes for different folks. I guess if that's what they think is good, they go ahead and do that. We tend to say that's horrible and they should be changed. We tend to think that cannibalism ought to be changed. That child abuse cannot be made acceptable just because it's widespread in a culture. We don't think that genocide is acceptable just because Hitler's Germany put up with it. And so the unbeliever can't live with that particular theory. Now, the idea that good evokes individual approval rather than social approval ends up in what is now called the emotivist theory of ethics. That when we talk about ethical terms like good and evil, we're just giving expression to our emotions. We're not really rationally describing anything. In which case, it would never be when someone says helping orphans is good. When Bill says that, he would not be saying the same thing as Ted when Ted says that. If Ted says helping orphans is good, what he's saying there is Ted likes helping orphans. When Bill says helping orphans is good, that translates Bill likes helping orphans. And so they're not even saying the same thing when they say helping orphans is good. Good is not an objective or public quality. It's just a subjective expression of your emotion.